here we are back again, and it's my pleasure to bring on to the show Larry Spring. He's the superintendent of the Schenectady School District. We've been just seeing a little bit in the paper about the school district. We hear about core curriculum, where, there's so much going on with education, and we've got an expert here to talk about it. Hey, Larry, good to see you again.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good. What's going on over at Mount Pleasant? I know we can bring this up.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Well, we've got a few different things going on. I think the thing that we're reading about right now is that there's a small group of kids that are really not behaving well. We've identified a bunch of them that in reality probably should not have been there this year, and we've removed those students from the school.
Now they're I don't want to say, is the word expelled, or they're not coming back right now?
They're not coming back. The law really doesn't allow for expulsion, and I don't think expulsion would be the appropriate thing for kids.
I knew that wasn't the right word, but I didn't know what else to use.
But it's that Mount Pleasant wasn't the appropriate place for them.
Okay.
And so, we're finding for those students more appropriate programs to help them get back on track to graduation.
Oh, good.
And then it's, a matter of within the building ensuring that the other kids that we're kind of
There's
seeing that behavior.
There's so many good kids that are, and they don't need that.
Right, and there were some kids who were watching some of that behavior thinking,
they can get away with it, huh?
Right.
Yeah.
And so we need to make sure that those kids understand that the rules need to be followed and those kinds of things. The other part is some things that are happening in the neighborhood outside of school, and this involves some of our students, this involves some of the families, and some of those things aren't good, and sometimes that involves parents doing things that are not good, or brothers or neighbors or things like that. And so we have to engage with the community, with the police department, with our community agencies to engage with those folks a little bit differently to make sure that our kids are safe on their way home, to make sure that everybody is behaving in a safe and reasonable manner.
If we work together, I think with the police, with the social services, with the people that are that can see what's going on and maybe step in and help or support you.
Yep. Everybody's got a piece of this. This is not just a school piece. There's a broader community piece in that neighborhood that needs to be addressed, and we all need to work together in order to make sure that, that neighborhood, that community, is doing well.
Well, it's good to hear that you're on top of it. The other thing we're reading a lot about is the core curriculum.
Common Core.
The Common Core. And I'm seeing that King is canceling some of his visits and things. Can you kind of give us a little update on that, and what seems to be the opposition to the core curriculum, Common Core?
Yeah,
because we know math and science is important.
Yeah. So first of all, I don't think that there's any opposition really to the Common Core. I think generally speaking, people feel like that's been a long time coming. It's needed. And in fact, it is the impetus that has allowed school districts to pare down the curriculum. For years, we've been criticized for having curriculum that's a mile wide and an inch deep. And the Common Core allows us to say, we're going to do fewer topics, but more in depth.
Okay.
So the Common Core in and of itself is not really a controversial thing. It begins to become controversial when we look at some of the other things that are happening in the state education world right now, and we start to think about the amount of testing that kids are having to go through.
Yeah, everybody's just gets really including the teachers.
Yeah, well, it's two forms of testing that's happening that is really at the center of this debate. There's state tests that are about whether or not schools and school districts are meeting the standards and kids are getting what they need out of education. And then there's this whole other set of testing that's coming about because of the teacher and principal evaluation system, that we need to test kids at the beginning of school and at the end of school to see whether or not
if goals have been met. Yeah.
Teacher goals have been met or principal goals have been met. So students are getting a significant increase in the amount of testing that they're taking during the year, and that's sometimes hard for them to understand.
Well, it takes away from education.
It oftentimes means a pause in the instruction that's happening in the classroom. Sometimes those tests don't necessarily make sense to children because they're taking a test, but they're being told this is not a result that you'll get back, it doesn't count on your grades. And so there's a lot of sense making right now that schools need to do with this new system. It really is a brand new system. There clearly are some some growth areas that we need to make, working with state ed to figure out, how do we make these things work? Because it's really rooted in a notion of accountability, and everybody wants accountability. I don't think you'll find very many people who would argue that accountability is not a good thing. It is a good thing, but we want to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's reasonable. It doesn't hurt kids. We shouldn't be pushing teachers and principals over the edge. We've got some work to do with that to make that a better, more effective system. That's for sure.
And it seems as though the kids, anytime, I don't know about you, I had 3 kids. If you mentioned test, it was like meltdown. I got a test tomorrow, Mom. Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of the issue is that for some kids, they take those tests really, really seriously, and they can get overly anxious about it. But for other kids, they realize these are not tests that impact me. When kids get to a certain age, they begin to realize some of these tests, they don't factor into my average. They don't have to do with whether or not I'm passing.
So do they care then?
Right. And
I mean, if you tell me, well, it doesn't make any difference, I don't know that I would put my best effort out, but a lot of people don't.
Right. But the test only serves the purpose that it's intended if the students that are taking it are trying their hardest on it.
Well, I read some of the questions that were on some of the tests, and they seem to be a little bit biased in the sense that, they're like one of the questions was, she put her clothes in the bureau, and that kids don't know what a bureau is. Nobody calls it a bureau anymore. They call it a dresser or a chest of drawers, but nobody calls it a bureau. So kids are, in one of the photos was a burro, an animal. So it's kind of like, what are we testing?
Yeah, and so part of what we're testing with that, how the state constructs those tests, we might think of that as cultural bias. I think the test makers would say that this is background knowledge and vocabulary, and that bureau is a word that kids should know at some point.
But they had a building of a bureau, like
different kind of bureau. Yeah, and so a lot of times with these tests, and there's certainly quite a bit of debate about Pearson, and the testing company that's creating these things, and how sometimes they get these really off the wall questions through. Those aren't even the most egregious examples. I think the one last year, the talking pineapple.
The talking pineapple. Tell me about the talking pineapple. What is that?
So they wanted to know about a pineapple that really was pulled from a nonsensical story. That
no kid had ever read, probably. No.
Well, and they were supposed to not have read it, but the story was nonsensical, but the questions were structured as though it was, and so kids had a really hard time figuring out the answers to this question. In fact, afterwards, when they kind of did the post-mortem on the test, they realized anyone would have a really hard time figuring out the answers to this test. And
I'm already confused about the talking pineapples.
The Wall Street Journal went to the author of the story and asked him about it, and he said, it's nonsensical. You can't make sense of that. You can't ask questions like, what would the pineapple do with this story? So there's certainly work to be done with some of those things.
Well, you remind me that when I took literature in college, and we had to read Huckleberry Finn, I think it was, and in the beginning, Mark Twain puts down, "Don't try and analyze this story," and we all showed that to our professor. Look, we don't have to analyze it. Because Mark Twain said, "Don't bother." So this kind of falls into that same category. Yes. And it's like whenever you have a test, do you not have, not you personally, but do they not have a focus group to find out whether these questions have any validity?
Yeah, so they do field testing, and every year, a small portion of test items get tested out in schools, and so every year kids from our schools do some field testing.
And those don't usually count towards, I know when we did national exams, we would have questions, for pharmacy, we'd have questions in there that we just tested, and we didn't count them just to see. Yeah,
so they do that. They do that kind of testing. They have their validity statistics on those items, but still somehow some of these things come through that when you look at in retrospect, you say, how possibly?
What I think is all the administrators should take these tests. But Larry doesn't have to, right?
I think I would do okay until I got up to chemistry.
or sometimes these other subjects with talking pineapples might
Right.
throw us too.
Yeah.
So good. Larry Spring, he's the superintendent of Schenectady School District. We're always pleased to have him on the show. We're going to be having him on again. It's great to get an update. We know that this gentleman is working very hard and people that don't always want to agree with an education or having an education. But education is important, and so stay in school, right?
Absolutely.
Good. Larry Spring.